right, so today we are going to be looking at early 20th century women in art again, specifically with German Expressionism and World War I, largely propaganda posters, women, and World War I. So if you want to look at the topics here that we have, we're going to be looking at some key female German expressionists, women in propaganda, and then women artists in World War I. Now, Expressionism is essentially the idea of artists looking to express emotional experiences rather than impressions of the external world. So that there's a higher emphasis on that emotional expression than just what's going on around in the world. Now, in Germany, women who wanted to become artists ended up receiving training, much like elsewhere in the world, with significant difficulties, and differently, probably with more discrimination, as at the time, around 1890, women were not permitted to study in the state-sponsored art academies in Germany and Austria. Right, so they were largely prohibited from the local schools in any way, and of course, women in other areas had been restricted as well. But usually we saw examples of at least a few women being able to push their way in, and they were largely excluded from that, and they were not only allowed not to attend the schools that were what led to specifically the academies, or what led to the professional artist, right? So if you were wanting to be seen as a professional artist, you went through the state schools. They could attend schools for applied and decorative arts, but not the fine arts. And the fine arts, of course, is what's seen as like the traditional art, if you will. And you know that, and that's the high art. It's fine art is usually the term is used to describe the art that was seen as the legitimate art of the time, even though you certainly can argue that's not the only type of legitimate art. It is often seen as what is the acceptable legitimate art is in that kind of topic. And of course, the applied and decorative arts was seen more as part of women's sphere anyway. In response to this lack of opportunities that arose, you have a school that opened up that was the Verein der Künstlerinnen. I'm sure I butchered it. The Verein der Künstlerinnen. That word always as a struggle with that. And this they ran essentially independent schools in Berlin and Munich and a couple other places that were for specifically women to attend. So this was kind of the alternate school for women that developed because they were prohibited from the state schools. There was also significant segregation in terms of men and women. They were women and men were not attending or allowed to attend the same schools, which was very different from France and England, which had been moving to integrate women into the traditional male educational schools. The Berlin school was open around 1885 when Kata Kollwitz, who's probably the most well-known German expressionist female artist, attended and was enrolled. And the school was very expensive. So we put here expensive, which of course then limited who could afford to go to this school. In fact, it was double the cost of the state schools for education. So, and not only was it more expensive, but it was seen as less rigorous, which certainly isn't anything different than what we've been looking at in terms of the difficulties that women had to go up against compared to that. And it was largely impossible for women to gain status in the Prussian Academy of Fine Arts, which was the local academy of fine arts. So again, while in France and England, we do see women slowly get accepted into these academies, women were in Germany were largely excluded from that. And it took until the early 1900s for them to allow any women in, which was Kata Kollwitz was the first to be allowed into the Prussian Academy of Fine Arts. She ends up holding a directorship in the graphics art department from 1928 until 1933, when she ultimately has to resign due to pressure from Nazi control at the time. So we're going to look at the kind of three most well-known German expressionists of this time period for that. And of course, just understanding that, like, just like with their counterparts in France and England, they went up against a lot of these difficulties and barriers that existed, although I would argue, as mentioned here, that they had some additional steps that they went up against or had to take that were slowly, very slowly disappearing in France and England. So the first woman that we're going to be looking at is Paula Modezone Becker, and what the type of art and structure that she created. So she was born in Dresden in Germany to upper middle class family, again, being able to support that interest and stuff like that. And she felt like she had decided that she wanted to become an artist around 16, and was given art lessons as part of her finishing school. And then when she visited relatives in London, she attended the St. John Wood School of Art in London. That was one other way that German women artists could gain education and opportunities, was just like actually like American women, to go to France or England and enroll in schools there. So that was another way to kind of bypass some of the restrictions that were otherwise present in Germany at the time. And so this school, the St. John Wood School of Art in London, was seen as the best school for preparing students for the Royal Academy, which again was for England, right? The Prussian Academy in Germany, the Royal Academy in England. So this was a high caliber school that many male artists went to, as well as female artists. That was your kind of gateway into being able to get into that academy. And so she was able to not only go to a school that was highly rated, but experience coeducation. And which the benefit of that, right, is there are benefits and certainly negatives to the sex segregation, right? Sometimes if you have an all-female school, this can provide women with opportunities that they otherwise would be ignored or limited to if men were part of the school as well. At the same time, though, not being exposed to male artists also presents some limitations in learning from, being exposed to different styles and techniques, which many women often gained inspiration from and adapted their style from. So she was able actually to experience this coeducation, and specifically from a school that prepared students to be professional artists, right? So that was the one thing that was missing in the other school, right? The Verein der Künstlerin school didn't offer that professional component. Essentially, there was an assumption that they were not going to become professional artists. She did, however, of course, after spending time and getting that schooling, go back to Berlin, where then she did study at the school in 1896. There were separate departments at the school for drawing, painting, and graphics. And while women attended the school, there were mostly male teachers and only a few female teachers that were in the school, and only a few that were connected to the Prussian Academy, which again, if you're wanting, we've seen in art, if you're going to become well known, if you're going to have opportunities to be a professional artist, part of the thing that needs to take place is the opportunity to be seen and your work to be shown to a variety of people. Having teachers that were connected to the Prussian Academy, having more of them, right, would have opened up more opportunities for women to advance further. Not having many that were connected to the professional artist world meant your ability for exposure is more limited. So women had to also kind of fight against that aspect of it as well. She then moved to the Worpswerde Artist Colony and lived there. And certainly this is basically like a co-op of artists, right? And so it's called a colony, but it's like a co-op. They lived together in several buildings and worked on art, exchanged ideas, learned from each other. And at this community, they used a lot of local peoples and landscapes as subjects, specifically painting with dark tones and stuff. So local peoples and landscapes. And it did shape some of her style to have that kind of darker tones and neutral palettes that she used. So I'll say dark earth tones. This eventually, so Becker from here went to Paris and spent several years there getting more training and participating really in the French avant-garde movement and learning from that style. She ends up marrying Otto Modeson in 1901. And in 1906, this is when she painted her self-portrait. It just deleted it there. Here. Let me try again. And what is significant about this portrait is it's one of the first known nude female self-portraits that is known to be painted by a woman. So not just a nude female portrait, but self-portrait, right? So this is one of the known first self-portraits that's nude. Women typically didn't paint themselves or draw themselves or portray themselves as nude because it tended to go against expectations of decency. And while certainly women had been painted nude by male artists, and even potentially painting women nude that are kind of an unknown woman, to do your own self-portrait has a layer of vulnerability that far exceeds just the general nude portraits that were commonplace. And we talked about nudes were a huge thing in the male form and even the female form, largely reserved for men. Women were not, in many of the schools, were not allowed to participate in the nude life drawings in those classes because it was seen as improper. So this was a significant step in not only, like I said, drawing a nude female, but having it be a self-portrait. So the vulnerability of showing yourself in that light to try to showcase and represent who you are was significant. She combined kind of the combination of avant-garde style within the nude portrait, along with, of course, this idea of the emotional sly expression on her face, with some of the general characteristics of avant-garde. She ends up, and actually, Paula is often seen as um, her style being something that's a mix of German expressionism and avant-garde. So almost something like new in that it's not quite the full range of expressionism that we're going to see from like Kata, or even Gabrielle, but it still has pieces of that looking in at oneself, looking at feelings, looking at that emotional moment that the artwork is showcasing. Just not quite to the same level. We'll see. We'll see. Like, especially with Kata, she's probably the best example of that kind of expressionism. All of her pieces are very kind of emotional and raw in terms of that inner feeling with that. But you certainly can see here, as she's looking out with this smile that suggests that she has, she's remembering or thinking of something on her mind, looking out into the distance as she stands next to some bushes. There, you have that mix of the greenery and the what was this? The general scenery of outdoor, standing outside in the nude, but this kind of coy smile that she knows something or is imagining or thinking of something, and we're left to guess what it is that she's feeling or thinking in that moment. And it's certainly not a timid look. It definitely is one of more confidence than a one that is uncertain or scared. So she went back and forth to Paris several times, but ultimately returned home when she got pregnant. Unfortunately, she died 3 weeks after giving birth to her daughter, which, of course, ended her career right when she was, really getting to the height of her popularity. She was a prolific painter. She had over 80 works of art that she painted in her very short time. She died pretty young, and of course, leaving a family behind in the process. One of the other things that we have from her that's super helpful is that she wrote a lot of letters and journals that ended up getting published after World War One, and this not only gave us a ton of primary sources on a woman artist and her thoughts and process and experiences, but also increased interest in her artwork based on her writings and her journal writings as well. All right, the next artist is Gabriele Munter. And Gabriele Munter is 1877 to 1962. And she studied also at the same school in Germany. But she ultimately became dissatisfied, which many women did, with the level of instruction, and she ends up enrolling in Wassily Kandinsky's class, which was an alternate. I only have that right there, so I'll write it here. Let me go back. It was seen as an alternate art school that was taught. Oh, here we have Kandinsky, and it was seen as an alternate art school, and he was an artist, and he did nurture her artwork. Kandinsky respected her abilities and did inspire some of her best work. In fact, he often was kind of that muse for that. From 1902 to 1914, they lived, traveled, and worked together. They also became close friends with Russian artist Alexei Jelinski and Marianne von Werfeken. And that's these two. And in fact, her one of her most well-known art pieces, called Boating, is this one here. Showcases their son. The young child is their son, and this is Marianne, and this is Kandinsky standing up here. Right, he's center, and then of course Munter is right here. She's rowing the boat. So you can see bold and dark colors. And you have there's kind of two focal points. Obviously, one is Kandinsky, who you get the most in terms of his expression, his kind of emotional stance of is looking off pensively and more seriously off to the side. You get a little bit of expression too with Marianne looking somewhat angry. But then the second focal point, of course, is Munter herself as she's rowing and steering the boat. And Kandinsky, of course, stands out because behind him he's silhouetted by the green fields. And of course is because he's standing as well too. Versus, Munter has her back position to us, and the color contrast of her shirt, along with her hat, makes her stand out. But the act of her steering the boat also, it has this viewpoint of her in control of where they're going, in control of steering the boat. And certainly the goal of this was to, and the blue doesn't show up super well, but if you look at the central part, it's to contrast between her and Kandinsky, and kind of that moving your focal point back and forth between those two people. This is one of her few paintings with more than one figure. A lot of her paintings just centered on one person, but this one obviously had 4 people for that. So it was unique, not just in the interest of that kind of emotional connection between her controlling, while everyone kind of looks back at her, and the focus goes back to her, and then of course Kandinsky is the centerpiece to that contemplation, but also because she had multiple people in this painting itself. It definitely is connected to this romantic theme here, the German romantic theme of water as a symbol of life's passage. This was a big thematic aspect in German art around this time, was to use water as that symbol of your life and your journey, or your passage to a next transition. And certainly her ability to balance the landscape with the people, and having the focal point centered around them too, with everything else that's going on, is pretty impressive as well. This artwork, the boating, ended up getting displayed over the next decade all over the place. It was exhibited over and over and over again in that process. And so her life was a little bit I don't know, chaotic. Her love life was disappointing to her, I should say. It didn't go well with her and Kandinsky. So during World War I, Munter moved to Stockholm in 1915 when Kandinsky returned to Russia because of World War I. Unfortunately for her, after he went back to Russia, he ends up getting married to a woman there. And when she finds out, she obviously felt a lot of anger towards Kandinsky for what was seen as a betrayal. She felt that she had been cheated out of her life and career because of devoting kind of everything to him, and him very quickly going to Russia and then marrying someone. And unfortunately, her artwork declined after Kandinsky left and married another woman. And she didn't really find another community that inspired her to produce art like that first community. She wrote, and this, I think this quote gives a good example of how much influence Kandinsky had on her and her artwork, but also, of course, just the feeling of betrayal and anger at someone who you loved and thought cared for you and loved you, that then feels like you betrayed him. She wrote, I allowed myself to be lied to and cheated out of my life. Now I have nothing and never had anything. I think that even what I gained from him as an artist was only half, only a small quarter, nothing complete, no totality. I mean, it's really a harsh sentiment, but it does explain why her artwork declined so much after Kandinsky left, because she's basically saying here, like, right, that she was cheated out of life when she still had life left, but that sense of betrayal was strong, and I think a lot of her, like I said, not just inspiration but desire to create art disappeared with Kandinsky because of the depression and feeling of betrayal that took place. Because she certainly is discrediting her talent in here, right? And then deciding that she's kind of nothing, and that it's all been a lie. Which, your love life you may have been cheated on and lied to, but that does, she unfortunately connected it to her artwork as well, because again, she was so enmeshed in that community with the other couple, Russian couple, and her and Kandinsky, and it had so been an integral part of her early development that, yeah, I mean, it makes sense why that connection made it difficult for her to produce art afterwards. It's really harsh, and certainly unfortunate that she saw herself kind of in such a low position, only tied to Kandinsky or not, rather than seeing herself still as an independent artist who can be outside of that relationship. It certainly shows the complicated relationship that women had with male artists, who were often essential to their development, both in inspiration, sometimes, of course, that professional connection, and of course, in her case, we'll say love interest, but even just the ability to create visibility. Women artists often found that they needed to be connected to some male artist to have themselves put out there in the visibility that they needed to be successful. And in other cases, just were inspired by different works of male artists who were, of course, more promoted. So when you're studying art or art styles, you're most likely seeing other male artists' work that's inspiring you. But of course, if it leads into a romantic relationship, that can create complications. But even just, I think, a warning of the complications of having women having to tie themselves to male artists to get that visibility, to have that connection to the professional development, certainly has that complication that is a balance between private life and, let's say, public life of an artist. Now, the most well-known was Kata Kowitz, and in part, some of why she was best known is because her artwork, she did a lot of prints that could be produced cheaply, and so that many people could purchase them. And in part, that was because of who her targeted audience was, and also her desire for her artwork to be spread and viewed by many people. Her career spanned 4 decades, so it was definitely the longest. She focused a lot on drawings and prints in black and white. Again, she preferred printmaking process in her student years, and that continued through her professional years as well. In part because a lot of her artwork actually the majority of artwork, had a political message or connection to it. It's like social commentary and statements. Almost all of her artwork had either some political or social commentary on life. She had several, and I have a couple we'll look at with when we talk about women artists in World War One at the end. There's a couple from her that I'm going to show there too. She did several with the kind of the emotional toil of warfare on the family, on women, on mothers, and that are very powerful. But a lot of her artwork looked at targeting the lower working class, and she wanted them to be able to purchase her artwork because the idea was to have it spread around to make those political and social points to hopefully not just critique, but of course the goal with that critique was change. And the only way that's going to happen is if people are able to have that artwork to utilize to push for change. And then middle class artists are people also tended to buy her artwork. Her artwork was not for the wealthy, so that was something that was different too. Is that her artwork didn't appeal to the wealthy, because of course it was challenging the social class structure that they were in, and largely looking at labor and working conditions for the lower classes, which oftentimes the wealthy either didn't want to broach or didn't care about. But so she, like I said, was definitely the most prolific because a print was less expensive than a painting. You could make multiple copies of, and she didn't see the need to do the full color. So you have this type of style is common more than and then sketches and drawings as well. With that, this drawing here is the March of the Weavers, and of course is showing the idea of a mother and child, the child asleep, head down, facing downward, arms in jacket cold, weary expressions. It's meant to show the hard labor, the way that it drains one's energy. Just kind of the I don't want to say completely lack of hope, but certainly downtrodden is probably a good word for it, right? That this kind of life beats you down. It's physically exhausting. It's tiring, and people, they're not cheerful and singing and dancing. They're just pushing through to get through the day, right? And this was connected to that commentary in life of basically being anti-capitalist and trying to show the negative impact on society and people due to the greed of capitalism. Her father was a socialist and an activist, so that certainly impacted and influenced her political beliefs throughout her lifetime. And as mentioned, had strong sympathies for the poor and was generally seen as an anti-capitalist in most of her kind of convictions and paint drawings. Her father did encourage her artistic talents, and she received drawing lessons from a local artist. So she actually started off just with essentially having a local artist come tutor her. She eventually did study in Berlin and Munich, and she married Karl Kollwitz in 1891 and had 2 sons. The March or Revolt is the other name for this, right? Is this one, March or Revolt of the Weavers, was one of her first major graphic series. There was a series of that. So I guess the series is called The Revolt. This one painting is The March. But again, the themes in her work: misery of impoverished working class, the presence or the presence of death, or the constant nearness of it due to being overworked, and the kind of destitute life that the lower classes, working class, had to deal with it. And so her artwork with the March of the Weavers and the Revolt of the Weavers was definitely showed sympathy for the need for revolt to improve working conditions. That work received high praise. So the Revolt of the Weaving Class, there were 6 prints made of different series showing in the stages of despair and revolt and pushing back for change for the working conditions. She actually was nominated for a gold medal for her work, but the Kaiser, which was the German leader at the time, denied her award due to essentially her political leanings being too radical for him, which isn't surprising. That they would have seen that as dangerous. The Kaiser would have seen that as dangerous and challenging the status quo. Her later work explored themes of death, pains, joys of motherhood, injustice of economic and political oppression of the poor. Also, World War I and impact of war. Her son died in World War I, and she ended up creating many prints and memorial sculptures that showed that grief and rage and the futility of war, and not just the futility of war, but also the loss and all the emotions that came with that. And we'll again, especially with the World War One artwork, you can see the grief in the artwork. You can see the sadness and despair. I mean, you get a sense of despair and downtroddenness with the weavers, but it's a whole nother level of that emotional anguish and pain that she so clearly shows in that work. So when we get to the end of that, we'll bring that back up. This was a self-portrait when she was, I think, around 70 years old. And again, you can kind of see, one is showing her sketching and drawing, but that kind of weariness in her face, the tired nature, fit very perfectly with the themes that she often showed in her artwork. She was actually elected president of the Women's Art Union in 1914. And this group, the goal was educational. So we can put Women's Art Union. And it was not only meant to be educational, but having women teach, right? And the emphasis on women learning to teach and being able to teach at all public schools. So there was a huge promotion for not only preparing women artists, but pushing for them to be able to teach at any of the public schools that were there. She also helped found GDOC, that's the acronym for it, which this is the Society for Women Artists and Friends of Art. So again, that is Society for Women Artists and Friends of Art. This was a feminist organization that sponsored exhibitions and other activities to bring awareness to women artists. So she was a huge, the later work and achievements, she was a huge proponent of expanding women's opportunities and availability in the art world, specifically in Germany, and was kind of and created all of these programs and groups to push that through. So again, the idea of a lot of her artwork focused on protest, on expansion of rights, of challenging the system, and then she actually went and did that in real life too. So that connection is pretty impressive. She became the first woman to be elected to the Prussian Academy in 1919, and that was a big deal, right? That the Prussian Academy had been completely off as not an opportunity for women before that time, and eventually she actually became the director as well for that. So all of that, gave her opportunities and push for change and improvement of women artists in the process. All right, we're going to look at women and propaganda in World War One, and we'll come back to this poster here as well. So if we look at the background to how you get to these propaganda posters, because it is important to understand this development and stuff. You know, the United States had an isolationist policy when World War One started, and actively promoted that the U.S. was not going to get involved in wars. In fact, within the presidential elections, one of the slogans was, "He kept us out of war," with promises that the United States would not get involved. That was a Europe thing, and had nothing to do with the United States. Of course, isolation at this point in time in history is impossible. The world, as much as it still wasn't as connected as it is today, was still pretty small. And so there was a couple of events that pushed the United States into war. The first was the Lusitania incident. And this is with the Germans and U-boats. So U-boats were a new thing. They're like the precursor to like more modern submarines. The U-boats were pretty simplistic, but what they were really good at is sinking ships and hindering the British naval power, creating blockades that they couldn't get past because you couldn't see the U-boats. They were scary too, because it was a new thing and this kind of scary boogeyman under the water. The thing was, though, like, you literally could just avoid getting torpedoed if you constantly did like a zigzag pattern in your travels, because the targeting and the torpedoes weren't very sophisticated. So like they kind of had to shoot in a straight line. So as long as you kept moving, it was harder to hit. But it was this thing that was seen as breaking decorum. Right. It was seen as undignified to shoot at an enemy that couldn't see you, right? There's all this idea of rules of war, and there was criticism for it, but of course it was beneficial for the Germans at the time, and they were sinking ships. The Lusitania was a British passenger ship that ended up being sunk by a U-boat. So the thing with the Lusitania is that there was actually, they had a sister ship that was basically built the same way as Lusitania. The sister ship actually was converted to a warship and was being used as a warship. There was some law or rule that like all ships had to be able to, over a certain size, of course, had to be able to convert to warships in time of war. And while they didn't convert the Lusitania, it had some of the characteristics of the warships, because of course they had to have those components if it was requisitioned by the government essentially to become a warship. And then you had the sister ship that looked exactly like Lusitania with those modifications. So in one way you can argue that the Germans may not have known when they decided to sink it that it wasn't one of the warships. However, they did warn people not to go on it. The Germans put advertisements in the newspapers warning people not to, and it took off from New York. So Lusitania was going from New York to England. And they put advertisements in the newspaper for New York warning people not to get on the ship. And part of that was because supposedly there were ammunitions and weapon parts in the ship. And so one of the suggestions was that the Lusitania essentially was using the cover of civilians and passengers to get past the German blockade, because up to this point, the Germans and the U-boats, there was a rule that you didn't sink passenger ships, right? If it had nothing to do with war, they were allowed to continue on. All right, so the captain was told to zigzag and follow that pattern, because of the warnings, because of the concern with advertisement, and the fact that if you zigzag, they were not likely to be able to hit you. So their captain was warned. People were warned. In fact, I think only one person didn't go on the boat because of the newspaper advertisements. But ultimately, the U-boat saw the Lusitania, and the captain did not do the zigzagging that he was supposed to, and instead just went in a straight line. Either just feeling like it wasn't necessary, or forgetting, maybe under the assumption that because they were a passenger ship, they would not be targeted. But ultimately, the Germans fired on the Lusitania, and 1,195 people died, including, of course, 123 Americans. And this created outrage and conflict between the United States and Germany. There was back and forth with this in terms of like Germany apologizing, offering to pay for the people who lost family members from this. They made a brief promise they wouldn't shoot on passenger boats anymore, but then reversed that when it became clear that people could just utilize that to smuggle stuff like they thought the Lusitania was doing anyway. This didn't lead us into war, but the combination of that with the Zimmerman Note is what led the United States to get involved into war. So the Zimmerman Note was a telegram that was intercepted by the United States. It was from a German ambassador to Mexico. And it basically said, hey, Mexico, like, you know how the United States totally took your land? If you were interested in getting it back, you know, just in case you thought about it, we would totally support that if you did that. and so, you know, so basically Germany promised to support Mexico if they attacked the United States. And that was the kind of final straw to saying, okay, the United States is going to have to declare war on Germany. But then there's a problem. There had been huge anti-war sentiment this entire time the World War I has been going on. How do you get people in the United States to support the war effort? Because they basically were doing a 180, right? This whole time it's been, oh, down with war, war's bad. And now we're keeping you out of war too. Oh, by the way, we're going to war. So what happened is the CPI was created. And the CPI was the Committee of Public Information. And their whole job was to create propaganda to get people to support the war effort. And they were successful. They were successful in shifting the public opinion to do so. And they did it through posters, postcards, speeches, songs, things like that. The thing that was most popular were the propaganda posters. And in these, women were used significantly to influence the way that people felt about the war. So there are multiple different ways that women were portrayed in these posters, in this artwork, to convince the U.S. populace to support the war effort with that. So what I want to look at are the different types and ways. And we've seen a couple here, and I'll come back to these. I'm also going to bring up the other PowerPoint that has just the posters with that to show several examples. So there are differences between how women were portrayed if the posters were targeting men versus targeting women versus targeting we'll say the general public, like, which could be both men and women that were at the home front, right? So when posters targeted men for enlistment or monetary support in the war, women were portrayed often as victims, needing to be saved by the men, And so of course the idea that the men would come in and save them. The example, destroy this mad brute. We go back to this one here, is showcasing the gorilla is supposed to be the Germans. They have the cap and stuff, and of course it was meant to be like that they were subhuman. And they've got a bat that says culture stepping on America, and it's to enlist, right? But you have here the depiction of the woman who is her dress is falling off, exposing her breast. Her arms and hands are on her face in distress, right? She's being essentially attacked and brutalized by the Germans. So the implication is, of course, that this woman in distress who's a victim needs your help, and by enlisting, you can save her, right? And they had several posters like this. Here's another one. Must children and mothers plead in vain, buy more liberty bonds. This one's a combination of both guilt trip, which we'll come back to, and suffering, right? So it's meant to show this woman with her young kids suffering because of the war, and saying, do they have to beg you, buy liberty bonds and you can save them. Let's look at the other. I'll go over these other two, and then we'll look at the I'll just go through these, and then we'll go through the posters. That probably makes more sense than going back and forth. The other way, there was another one that was called Halt the Hun, buy U.S. government bonds. And this is a soldier that's putting his hands to stop the German soldier. And there's a woman and child in distress looking like they're about to be killed or attacked. And the soldier's looking with his chin up proud, stopping them from attacking women. So another one that shows victims and stuff. But certainly this idea that, again, that the man is the hero, saving women from becoming victims of the Germans. There were also several posters that specifically said, uphold our honor, right? The idea that by joining the war effort, you are protecting the honor and virtue of not just the United States and liberty, but of women as well. And that women are portrayed in that way. And then when another way that they did besides victim, this is still towards men right here, was of course sex appeal. Sex appeal in the posters was also meant to encourage men to enlist. And this one went with also somewhat emasculation. So there was a combination of challenging masculinity and also sex appeal. So you have two here, right? I want you for the Navy. And she's kind of standing in this pose, wearing the Navy jacket, looking kind of seductively into the viewer's eyes. And then this one here is more the combination of challenging the masculinity with a little bit of that sex appeal. You have this girl kind of standing in a cute pose, smiling coyly, saying, gee, I wish I were a man. I'd join the Navy. And of course, implication is like, if this young girl would join the Navy, why haven't you? What's wrong with you that she's wishing she could join the Navy, but you haven't done so already, right? But it definitely was this encouraging men to enlist using attractive women, combined with that challenging masculinity in the process. Both using that mix of sexuality and embarrassment to convince men to join. There is another one that has a woman in a much more sheer dress, which would have been scandalous, like for a woman to wear out in public at the time. And she's holding up the American flag in like a kind of over the head, like charge kind of hold. And it says fight or buy bonds. Right, and there's soldiers marching in the background. So again, this idea of this woman using sex appeal to convince them to participate in the war effort. So again, when women are portrayed and viewed in art, with the propaganda posters, you have this idea of victims, of men as the heroes, saving them, and or as these appealing to sex appeal, as well as some challenge of masculinity in the process. And then you have the guilt. So the other one is guilt here, right? So we can go, probably should, skipped one here. So victims, heroes, this is for men though. So number 2 kind of goes with the victims. And then you have sex appeal, and then you have guilt, right? And the guilt, like this one here, right? You're supposed to feel bad that you're letting these poor women and children die. That you're not willing to do that. There's another one that says, for the glory of Ireland, will you go or must I? And that one doesn't use the sex appeal component, but it's a woman who's looks like a wife, and she's holding the gun, and she's basically challenging the husband. If you're not going to go, then I have to do it. If you're not going to do your duty, then I will go. And then there's some other ones that are definitely, we'll look at when we get to the other PowerPoint in a minute for that. So when posters appeal to women, right? So those were how women were portrayed when they were appealing towards men. When they are appealing to women, they have a very different representation. One is obviously that patriotism and strength. Multiple posters portrayed women dressed in the American flag, representing liberty and strength, and encouraging them to grow food. It talks about their role in victory and that they're needed for the success of the war, for the war to be successful, right? That they have to be a part of that. So one poster, and again, it's a little weird to explain it without showing, but I will show you these here. So one poster is a woman walking in the fields with her head held high, wearing the American flag as a dress, tossing seeds as she plants food. And it says, sow the seeds of victory, plant and raise your own vegetables. And she looks proud and patriotic. And it's meant to do that. And then at the bottom of the poster, it says, every garden a munition plant. So the idea being that women's roles are just as valuable as war industry jobs, right? Your job of planting a garden and making and growing food is just as valuable as a munitions plant making the bullets for the soldiers. This was reinforced by another one where a woman's holding up a pose with one hand is holding up a canned food. Her other one, her arm is down with her palms up, and it's meant to be like this kind of the Statue of Liberty pose. And it has it's called the fruits of victory, right? And more straightforward with be patriotic, sign your country's pledge to save the food. So again, this patriotism and strength, you could even argue like saving the country, right, as part of that. So we could add that. Okay, and then and I guess that goes into the role in victory. So, right, that they have a role in victory, in the success of that. And then when trying to convince women to buy war bonds and stuff, that there were a variety of ways to do that too. Some common ones that you show up, and this is not just war bonds. There's also some for meetings and the farms and stuff. Although a lot like this one here is the historical. So this one's for Britain, and both Britain and the United States did one with Joan of Arc. So Joan of Arc saved France. Women of Britain save your country, buy war saving certificates. So it's comparing Joan of Arc to the women of Britain and saying, right, you can be like Joan of Arc, this woman who is this known historical figure who fought and saved France. And just like she saved France, you can too. There was another one that is Wake Up America, and it's a woman dressed in like colonial attire. And it has her holding out a lamp running, like it's meant to evoke the idea of Paul Revere running through the streets, which he was on a horse. But running through the streets saying the British are coming, right? And instead it's women giving the warning to Americans, and it's evoking this idea of a woman can be like Paul Revere in their importance for the country and for the war. Those connections to strong historical figures were key to military success specifically that were key to military success were like what they wanted women to identify with, right? So that they could feel a sense of not just strength and power, but duty, and that women were needed for the war effort, which they were. But it very much is evoking this image of women that they obviously are not using when appealing to men. One other one that they, so what, that was 3. Another one that they do is with nurses and mothers. So you have, we'll say 4 traditional roles of women, which are the nurses and mothers. Because of course this fits into the domestic expectation of women through proper domesticity. And in this one you have, there's actually a couple with the Red Cross that talk about the greatest mother in the world. And this one is a later poster, still the greatest mother in the world. And both of these are using religious artwork and adapting it to fit the idea of the woman as not just a mother but a nurse, but also the greatest mother is supposed to be Mary and Jesus. So this one does it too. Like if you look at the scale, look how big she is. And then you have this kid, but it's kind of weird proportion, and then an old man that obviously is a weird proportion too. And this is done in hierarchical scale with religious works. So the religious one that they're referencing, both this one and more obviously the other one that I'll show you in a minute, was the Mary with baby, with baby Jesus. And then actually there's another one with Mary and when Jesus after he died on the cross and he'd been taken down, she's holding him. So they take this religious iconography and imagery and make instead this woman have this hierarchical scale, which is that she's larger than everyone else to signify the importance of her. And then has the weird scale and proportion of everyone else around her because they're mimicking, again, technically the image is of one of them is of her holding a baby. So, then you have that smaller scale. And the other one looks weirder too because it's a soldier on a stretcher, but he's, like size-wise compared to her. She's holding it, the guy on the stretcher, like he's an infant and stuff. But so this is appealing to the ideals of motherhood and caring and taking care of and providing for people in that process. They have another one where it's a woman nurse holding up one end of the stretcher and then the other one's like facing the viewer and it says hold up your end, and it was for fundraising and stuff. But again, the idea that women are important in these roles and are necessary for the help and success. And in any of these, the idea, of course, is this positive view of women, right? Women are portrayed in a very positive ways when the posters are appealing to women. They don't show them as a victim very often. They don't show them with sex appeal. Instead, it's about being proud and strong and powerful and important to the war effort, right? And that they can, what their actions and their choices are going to make a difference in that, right? Now, they did still use guilt trip, not just for men, but you have, then this one is essentially both, we'll call it the home front, right? This was both to men and women, or I think I said the general public, right? So there were posters that were for both men and women, right? There were clearly ones targeted for men and portrayed women in a very certain way, and then women portrayed in a certain way clearly just for women. And then you have ones that are portrayed that are kind of more neutral. This one is for everyone, and it doesn't actually portray women, but it's a really good guilt one, so I wanted to show it. So one of the ways that they do a lot with in the general public is guilt, encouraging both men and women to aid the war effort, that they should feel guilty if they're not doing so, right? So this one says, his liberty bond paid in full. This boy has made his last great sacrifice. Are we as Americans doing our part? Right, and the idea being buying Liberty bonds is you doing your part. There's another one that is shows a woman dressed in a flag, looking in the distance pointing out further away, that says, "For you, they are giving their lives over there. For them, you must give every cent you can spare." She has a very serious and somber look. It's meant to evoke the feelings of guilt if you don't support. And there's another one, the mother and daughter and son embrace while looking out the window of the soldiers. It says, "Women of Britain, say go." Mothers and children they understand the sacrifice. Are you strong enough to understand the sacrifice and be a part of that? So let's look at some of the posters for that here. This one I know, sorry, it's like a little off. I don't know why it's both PowerPoint, but for some reason when I sized it for the one PowerPoint, it's off on this one a little bit, but we'll still be able to see them. So I have a couple that don't show women, just so you can see some of the other ways that they like appealed to mostly men when they weren't using women and stuff. The United States Army builds men, right? And crafts character, physique. So they tried that one, and then I'm doing my duty, are you? But here's the For the Glory of Ireland, right? And this is that one that's the guilt. Will you go or must I? So it's not using sex appeal in this one at all. This one's more using like a typical wife and mother that's basically trying to and challenge masculinity as well, right? She's the strong, willing to do her part, right? But her husband, seemingly her husband, right, is hesitant, and she's having to, guilt him into going. Here we have Every Girl Pulling for Victory. Victory Girls United War Campaign. Obviously, this one is for women, right? Again, strong, independent, right? Determined. It's all that positive view when it's targeting women. This one here with the Land Army. This is for, again, farming. So the Women's Land Army of America, again, standing proud, holding the produce. You have the woman on the horse holding up the flag. It's meant to make them look, not just patriotic, but strong. Here, Women of Britain say go. So this one, again, this one's using guilt to get men to go to war, showing them as sacrificing for the good of the country. Here are the ones that are uphold our honor that I mentioned, right? So this one is combining the idea, and there's two with this one. Here's the other one. So this one definitely is that idea of protecting, that men need to protect women's virtue and honor, right? This still has some of that victim mentality of how they're portraying women, right? That somehow, again, she's at risk of being this one here. This one here shows a strong woman, but of course it's that's if honor is upheld, right? This one looks like, she's at risk of her honor not being defended and becoming a victim. So you have to help. Here we have the Gee, I Wish I Was a Man. We already talked about that one. And the Destroy This Mad Brute. This one's just a general call out, right, to men without using, images of women and stuff. But I need you right away. This one's funny. I just had to include it. A wonderful opportunity for you. So they tried this. If you notice, it says ashore on leave. Like, they try to make it look like, hey, join the Navy. It will be travel and fun when you're on leave. But, it feels, that one's super deceptive. They didn't do a lot with that one. Probably because people, saw through it and were like, yeah, Here's the I Want You one. So again, both of that other one, the Gee, I Wish I Were a Man, is meant to have that sex appeal, to have them, be attracted to the women are young, they're attractive, they're a little taunting in their statements to the men, but also slightly challenging their masculinity. And the whole idea being, if we portray women in this way, men won't want to disappoint, right? Because they're attracted. Here's the one that was a little more scandalous. And the only reason it's more scandalous is because her dress is super sheer, and this was definitely like, looks like what women would have worn as pajamas during this time, especially with how sheer it is and stuff. So that if a woman was walking out in public with that dress or undergarments, it would be seen as very scandalous. So this one definitely really upped the sex appeal. There's another one I can't find anymore where she's like actually like straddling a cannon and like being like, I wish I could go to war. And that one was super blatantly obvious with the sex appeal as well. This one is meant for both men and women to suggest that you helping out, right? You may not be the soldier, but if you're buying bonds buy bullets, right? Then it's almost like you're on the battlefield helping him, give him bullets. This was the one that for the Lusitania helped crush the menace of the seas. The menace of the seas were the U-boats, right? And it's somewhat referencing the idea of what happened to the Lusitania. So there are some that are just like, you can be a part of the war even if you can't go to war, which were targeting men that for whatever reason couldn't be part of the military, were disqualified or too old. And then obviously targeting women too. But instead of using women for this, they're talking about basically you're doing your part in the war effort that way. Here's the halt the Hun, right? So you have the woman and child who, with the German soldier, looks like he's about to, kill them or abuse them in some way. And the American soldier comes in and apparently is able to just stop him by putting his arm across him. So it portrays the man as the hero and the women and children as the victims and in need of saving. Here's the Joan of Arc for the U.S. So, right, we saw the one for the British. Again, Joan of Arc, Women of America, Save Your Country, buy saving stamps. So here you have, this is the historical figure. The one that's strong, independent, powerful, right? And meant to evoke this idea of, well, if Joan of Arc could do this, you can do it too. Here's the fruits of victory. Again, it's that Statue of Liberty stance and pose, but she's meant to be proud and strong and patriotic, and you get all that with like how she's standing and the connection to this idea of course, liberty, but also the she's looking ahead in this kind of strong stance and powerful stance. Here's the sow the seeds of victory. Right, her chin is up, her eyes are faced there, this proud walk, although you're wasting so much seed trying to plant that way. But the idea of, right, look how powerful and strong and independent women are and the importance they're doing. And it makes sense, right? This would appeal to women that this is going to appeal to women more than if they were only being shown the victims and sex appeal ones. But it's interesting to look at how in propaganda, right, the image of women and how women are portrayed varies so much by who they're trying to target and appeal to, that you have very drastic differences in views of women in that process. Here's another one. They shall not perish. American Committee for Relief in the Near East. Again, it's a strong woman with a weapon, doing her own protecting, right? She's not the victim. She doesn't need protecting. She is protecting the innocent. Here's for you, they're giving their lives over there. For them, you must give every cent. This is definitely the guilt trip one of right, they're dying. What are you doing? Here's the hold up your end. Right, so again, for women, that they would pick up the other side and help the nurses at the Red Cross. Only it's for fundraising and stuff. But that by fundraising and raising money, you are holding up your end and helping out in that same way. So especially for women who couldn't go overseas to support the war effort, this was appealing because it told them that they could participate and help out. Here's the original greatest mother in the world, right? This is the original one with the idea of that the soldier here on the stretcher is Jesus and she's Mary, and Mary was the greatest mother in the world. That's the reference. But of course, that then women also are the greatest mothers in the world, protecting and caring for the soldiers as nurses. And then here's the Wake Up America Day. Then again, the historical one with Paul Revere. Okay, so those are just some of the ones that highlight those differences and stuff that way. With the propaganda posters and stuff, right, it was effective. It was super effective in getting people to buy war bonds, to enlist, to support the war. And it changed advertising. Modern advertising is directly related to what they did here with all of this, and even actually using women a lot more in advertising. Before World War I, advertising was largely just descriptions. Maybe there would be like a drawing, not in color, just a black ink drawing of the item, but it would be focused on descriptive text. This table, this length, this height, blah, blah, blah. And you either needed it or you didn't, right? World War I with the CPI realized that you could use psychology to manipulate people through emotion. And so they started doing certain things, which was, we can actually put it here, large, we'll say full color, although this one has less color, large images, right, using women in a lot of them. We're going to look at the in the 1920s advertisements there too, and that are almost exclusively targeting women and using women and images for that. But then also short slogans or sayings, right? You have memorable short sayings or slogans that people will remember and stick in their head. And then you play, and all of this is meant to play to their emotions. When advertising picks it up, those are the things they change, and they realize that they can get people to want something so much through this kind of manipulation and propaganda and advertising that they feel like they need it. Right? They wouldn't have bought it, but you've convinced them that through these emotional connections and manipulations that's a product they want and stuff, and convince them to purchase it. So modern advertising is directly related to what the CPI did in World War I. In fact, they basically saw how effective it was and adapted that for advertising for purchases, and they used themes of not victims but sex and sex appeal, and realizing how beneficial that would be to selling, and realizing that how you portrayed women to women needed to be different than how you portrayed women to men, depending on what you were selling. In the propaganda posters, they expanded, of course, to victims of violence and guilt for men, along with, of course, the sex appeal. Versus for women, the, again, dignified femininity, strength, power, patriotism. So all of that had a lasting impact on not just the success of people supporting the war effort, but in advertising as well. All right, and then lastly, just real briefly, because this is already getting long, and I knew it was going to, so I didn't want to put too much for this. Women artists in World War I in general, and this is one of the artworks by a woman artist showcasing the destruction that the war had on towns, and women used their artwork to show a lot of times the consequences of war, sometimes the realities of and devastation of warfare in their artwork, and then of course the emotional consequences of war. And then other women emphasized like women's roles and their support, and then you had a few that just wanted to showcase, like, you know, the realities of war, like trench warfare and what that looked like, and the destruction, or the soldiers, and like giving snippets of that. And this is the first war where women were present to be able to give firsthand visual accounts, right? Previous wars, women had to hear the accounts and then take that and put that into artwork when we talked about like war art and stuff. This war, you actually have women overseas volunteering as nurses, as telephone operators, as ambulance drivers, and they were getting to see firsthand the destruction, the soldiers' life of war. And so the women started producing artwork to highlight that, right? And that was available because they now were part of like the Red Cross or an adjacent to the military itself and helping out. There was also photography. I didn't put any examples of that, but photography was, like I said, still a relatively newer type of art form that was now much more readily available. And there were several women that found it super important to take pictures of these kind of life and the events and what they were seeing in war itself. You have Margaret Hall, for example, volunteered with the Red Cross, and she was one of those that did the photographs. She captured trench warfare and city destruction with photographs. Where this is Grace. So Grace Digby. This is her painting of the destruction, right? So while she didn't take pictures, both her and Margaret Hall highlighted and showcased the destruction of war. And then, as I mentioned, you have also Katya, or Kathy, not Katya Kolitz, in her drawings. And this is one here. And she focused on the emotional anguish of a mother being informed of the loss of a loved one in war. This one is Killed in Action is the title. Right, and you just see the grief and sadness, and her work is so powerful because it radiates that emotion, right? This one is hers too. This one is the parents from war, and it's right, the idea of the loss, that the grief of the father, holding the mother with his hand. You don't even see their facial expressions here, and you can still see the pain and grief just on their body language that she's showcasing and highlighting. So she was probably one of the best women artists to highlight that emotional toil of war in general. And she continued to be an activist and push against that stuff later. But you also had women who, right, were showing the things with nurses and their women's involvement in, let's say, place or aid in war, right? That women. This one is the ambulance driver or back of the ambulance, and it has women pulling, or putting into the ambulance a wounded soldier, and showcasing their role within the war effort, right? So you do see the nurses and struggles and civilian anguish, and just increasing roles of women in the war effort, because this had far expanded how women were actively involved in war from this, and it was only going to continue to expand. By World War II, women can officially be part of the military, and that creates a whole nother level of that. So it's certainly the increase of women depicting war in art coincides with the increase of women's roles in war, which makes sense, both home and abroad. And that's just going to be a continuing expansion of that as we go. All right. Sorry it's so long. Lots to showcase there with that. So we'll leave it at that. And yeah, have a good week.